a regenerative city quickly, is to go beyond doing just less bad, but to say every part of our lives we have to break down and wonder where are the resources coming and how do we replenish those resources. That if we need electricity tonight, and usually I refuse to speak from microphones, not only because of my Baptist heritage, but because it's generated by coal. That if we use energy, how do we begin to break this linear approach that we import everything and spew out our waste? How do we begin to see it as a circular metabolism, renewable, replenishable? That if Copenhagen, which is the same size as Des Moines, announced 4 days ago in the New York Times that they will be carbon neutral in 6 years, why aren't we carbon neutral with that same ambition to change our energy structure, change our food structure, put in green waves so we can ride our bicycles throughout the town, put in light rails, do like Hamburg where you wait less than 1 minute for any form of zero emission transportation, to do like Adelaide, Australia, a town down under twice as big as Des Moines, that realized our city is not going to survive as a desert city. That we use coal that is ruining not only our coral reef, but our own water sources. And so they brought in a thinker in resident. And they had 90 days of forums to decide how do we plan out our roadmap to a future. Then they decided to create an eco-district, as you would in downtown, or even Beaverdale, or Beaverville? Beaverdale. Uh-oh, that one slipped. That we turn our neighborhoods into eco-districts one by one, that will do the investment, not only make them 100% renewable with geothermal for our heating and cooling and solar and wind, but then we use the infrastructure to talk about how we do local food movements. And then Adelaide realized we can't just do it all in our back gardens. We're not going to produce the food. We need to actually have an infrastructure. So they created 50,000 acres that circled the city using their waste. And so 90% of their urban waste was actually put into compost and used for these urban farms. They had farmers and residents. They paid young people to go out and farm again. And then they created transport on the first solar buses in the world to bring that food into farmers markets. And within 8 years, they cut their emissions by 20%, while their economy grew 28%. This boom of green jobs. They imagined the angels of bread. And I'm going to finish with this, that cities and towns and campuses, we can't champion the disingenuous anymore. We've got to get beyond well-meaning but dishonest frameworks of adaptation. There is no adaptation in Western Iowa tonight. There is no adaptation in Mozambique, where nearly 1 million children are astray because of the flooding. That we need to think about creating cities of resistance. And I saw this, for example. I work with communities, and I was in Gary, Indiana. And Gary, Indiana, of course, is written out as the requiems for Gary have been written for years, this former steel city that's choked by coal, that has been depopulated and left in ruins. And yet here was a church powered by solar energy, surrounded by orchards and local foods, called the Progressive Church, that held a forum of the Ecopolis to bring people to the table to eat and discuss their future as a regenerative church and community. Love songs to the scarred lungs of my people, the rapper Kristen Wilson sang that day. You see, Glocks ain't got nothing on the poison and the hostile air I have to breathe. There were young climate activists and Gary, like those in the Gulf of Mexico, like across the nation now, who are trying to reclaim a new narrative for climate. That we can't go on living as we're living now and just simply do less bad. Last fall, the IPCC, it's the main group of scientists around the world, came out that we have to cut our carbon emissions by 50% within a decade. And on that same day, 3 climate activists, grannies, were acquitted by the judge for their act to use bolt cutters on the padlocks at an oil pipeline. The judge accepted their necessity, their defense of necessity. This is also part of the resistance. The resistance of moving our city forward like St. Louis, the belly of the beast of coal companies. Every major headquarter of Peabody and all the rest of the coal countries are in St. Louis, and yet the aldermen of St. Louis unanimously voted last fall to adopt a goal of being 100% renewable by 2035. If St. Louis can do it, why can't Des Moines? How do we do this? How does the Catholic Peace Fellowship continue this incredible coalitions you have between so many people? How do we become sister cities, not just in name, but to be on the front lines with people in Mozambique, in Bolivia, in the Marshall Islands, and amongst low-income people and immigrants in Des Moines who bear the biggest burden? How do we take our words and put it into action? That's the question I ask you tonight. How do we get beyond just talking to coming to the table and then acting and then getting on our bike and becoming the catalyst for your community? You see, in an age of climate change, this kind of vision is not just essential. This is the only way we are going to adapt. And this is the only way we will have peace. And this is the only way that one day I will be able to take my children to the Des Moines River and say, "What's that?" And my son will say, "Oh, that's the freckled mad tom." "And what's that?" "Oh, that's the spotted bass." "And what's that?" "Oh, that's the American eel, excuse me. Eagles don't swim except in Iowa." We have so much to do. I'm going to finish with the final story. I keep telling you I'm going to finish, but it doesn't happen that way. My dad said, "God, they're lucky it's not Sunday morning." So I was sitting in jail with William Sloane Coffin. In 1985, we rose up as part of the Free South African movement. And we realized we had a president in those days. You know, the darkness of Sauron has been in the White House for a long time. We had a president in those days who referred to Nelson Mandela as a communist agent, who refused to enforce sanctions on apartheid in South Africa. And I don't know about you, but I still fly into Washington National, because this president refused to recognize the inhumanity of apartheid for the majority of South Africans of color. And so we blockaded the front doors of the South African embassy every day for 442 days. Congressmen, congresswomen, religious leaders, students, groups, every denomination. It was beautiful. Every day, everybody took their turn, because we said we are not going to go away, just like the young climate strikers who go on strike every Friday now, who say it's not going to be a one-day event. We're not going away until you change. And I'm sitting in jail. I was just a young man, and I'm thinking, this is a bit of a joke. We're going to go, we get arrested in Washington. You know, within 8 hours, you were released. You know, it's almost like clockwork. There was nothing dramatic about it. We didn't get beat up or anything like we were hoping to have. And And so I turned to Coffin and I said, man, there's no hope. Reagan's not going to recognize Mandela. Apartheid's never going to fall. And Bill Coffin, if you knew, is this larger-than-life, amazing man who had studied piano at Boulanger in Paris and then went on to the war and came back and actually became a CI agent until he had his road to Damascus and became one of our great theologians who was very active. In 1961, a story very few people knew, that he was on the first Freedom Rider bus to Alabama. And he was pulled off and beaten badly. And Bill, being this tough guy from World War II, wanted to fight back, and he was stopped by young African Americans who said, that is not what our campaign's about. We're in it for the long haul. And Bill sat in jail in Alabama, furious, saying, this is hopeless down here. And the young people taught him, hope resists, hopelessness adapts. And I thought about that when Nelson Mandela came to New York City years later. And I think about it today with you, with your grandkids, that hope resists, hopelessness adapts. And that is why we as older people must keep the resistance going. Thank you so much for your time.